2 of Understanding Stedman. So we had a really excellent presentation from David last week, which really went through the building blocks of Stedman. I'm in the fortunate position this week in that I was able to see how much David was able to cover, and also which bits might need a little bit more reinforcement for a few people. So with that in mind, the presentation I've designed today is focused on 3 areas. So I'm going to start by spending a bit more time reinforcing how you know which way to go on the front, whether you're quick or slow bell, and what effect the calls have on that. So David talked about a couple of techniques. I just want to go over those again and also introduce an additional technique that you might want to consider. So that's the first part of the presentation. And then following on from that, we're going to have a look at the effect of calls. So we're going to have a look at singles again in Stedman Doubles. I know this was covered a bit last week, but we're going to do it again. And then we're going to look at the calls in Stedman Triples. And then the third part of the presentation will be to focus on calling a simple touch. But very much, I'm not planning to go into calling in too much detail. So it'll just be a basic introduction to the calls. Okay. So another plug for Simon Limpard's useful guide of about 14 or 15 different methods or different ways of working out whether you're going to go in quick or slow. I hope Simon doesn't mind, but the vast majority of the methods that he lists, I wouldn't recommend people using because they would get on my nerves as a conductor, trying to make sure that people try as much as possible to avoid guessing which way they go in. So if we can all try to avoid the guesswork, that really helps the conductors and your fellow band members as well. But there are some of the methods that Simon lists that are particularly useful, I think, and one of them that David talked about last week was the 4-5 rule, which is also known as the diary method, because this rule was for many years included in the Ringing World diaries that are produced every year. And as Simon says in his guide, that the pros of this is that it's fairly easy to do and it's quite widespread. Lots of people use this rule. One negative aspect of it is that it does rely on the front bells being right. So if you get to 4-5 and the front bells are crunching, this rule isn't going to help you because you're not going to be able to reliably spot which bell you're striking over. But hopefully that won't happen too often. Most of the time, one would hope that the front bells would be in the right order. So the diagram towards the right of the screen shows 2 options. So on the left-hand diagram shows the effect of what would happen if you meet a bell in your first blow in force place. So this is your 4-5 double dodge on your way down. The bell that you meet on your first blow in force place, if they're then the bell you meet in your first blow in thirds place, you go in slow. So the bells that you're striking over in 4-5, we can label them as A, B, C. C is the one that you will swap with as you change from 1-6 to another 6. So we don't need to worry about bell C. We just need to focus on bells A and B. And the clue is, are you going to meet bell A or bell B on your first blow in thirds place? If it's bell A, you go in slow. And if on the right, it's bell B, you go in quick. And I think perhaps just spending a little bit of time just studying that diagram and also looking at a line of a plain course of Stedman Doubles or Stedman Triples would be quite useful to just try and get your head round what that feels like in practice. It would also be useful as well when we're back in the tower to perhaps stand behind somebody who's ringing Stedman. So you don't have to worry about pulling the rope and catching the sally and counting your double dodge, and just see if you can see it over their shoulder. Just see if you can put this rule into practice without having to actually ring a bell. Okay. So, is there anything in the chat, Arthur, or is that okay?
No, just a couple of comments around what that A represents. Graham says A is the bell you will turn from the lead. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So the next method, and this is a method that I particularly like, but I would say it's quite a difficult method. I would say that even some fairly competent ringers themselves would struggle with this method. And that is to actually watch or listen what's going on the front. Again, it does rely on the bells on the front obviously being right. You know, that goes for the previous method as well. But as I said before, hopefully most of the time that would be the case. It's a good practice to get into because it's very useful for ringing other methods as well. If you can have an enhanced awareness of what's going on around you when you're ringing, that will really help as you build more confidence and learn more methods. That said, it's easy to say that. It's very difficult to do it. You've got a lot of other things you're having to concentrate on in the tower. You know, as I say, a lot of quite good ringers, or a lot of very good ringers, I would argue, would struggle to always use the watch and listen method in Stedman. So it's perhaps one of the methods to have in your arsenal, along with another method that might be quite useful. Okay. So the third method, and the final one I want to talk about now, is the course bell method. And this is something that I personally use quite a lot. And it's basically, in this example that we've got here, we're ringing Stedman triples. So we're on 7 bells. When we double dodge 6, 7 up, we just need to try and remember which bell we dodged with. So in the example here, on the left of the 2 diagrams, the green line is bell number 5. So we're the red line ringing the treble, and we are double dodging 6, 7 up with the 5th. It's going to take us a bit of time before we get to the front, but we can just carry on our double dodging down, our double dodging in 4, 5. And all we need to do is to see what's happened with the 5th. And of course, as we cross from 4th place to 3rd place, the 5th has gone out again. So we know when we hit the 5th here, the 5th couldn't have gone in slow, because if the 5th had gone in slow, it would still be on the front, because the slow work takes a number of 6s from start to finish. The quick work, you're on the front and off the front again in the same 6. So the fact that our course bell passes us in 3, 4, where my cursor is, indicates that we must be a slow bell, because the 6s alternate, quick, slow, etc. If the 5th was quick, we must be slow. And we don't necessarily have to use the watch and listen method here, although it's helpful if you do. But if we can't for whatever reason, then all we need to do is to just keep half an eye on the 5th and just see where it ends up. In the example on the right, this time the blue line is bell number 3, although that doesn't matter. We're the red line, the treble again, and we're double dodging 6, 7 up. This time we need to remember the bell we're dodging with, and it's the 3rd. And the same rule applies, but this time we are not crossing the 3rd in 3, 4 when we're going on the front. So we know that the 3rd wasn't the quick bell, because if the 3rd was quick, it would have been in and out, and it would have crossed with us in 3, 4. So the 3rd must have been slow. So therefore we go in quick. And here's just to show you how that works on doubles. So this method will work on any number of bells. If you've got the mental capacity to take it in, then it's possibly a bit more useful on lower numbers of bells, simply because the more bells you have, the longer it takes to get from the back of the change to the front of the change, and you can sometimes forget who your core spell is. But on 5 bells, for example, it happens so much quicker, which in some ways is difficult because the speed element, you know, you're on the front, you're on the back, it's quite challenging, but you've got less time to forget as well. So here we are again in this example on doubles. We're ringing a treble again, which is the red line, and we're double dodging 4-5 up with the green line. And we can see when we're double dodging 4-5 down, we can see again, we cross the treble, we cross the 5th, which is the green line, in 3-4. So the 5th must have been quick, therefore we will be slow. And here we can combine the core spell rule with the 4-5 rule. And it's always good to try and combine 2 different methods if you can, although you might need to build up to that a little bit. So here I've just illustrated what we saw earlier with the 4-5 rule, but also applying the core spell rule as well. So as with all the presentations that are delivered for the guilds, this will go straight on the website. So if you've got time to go back onto the website after tonight's session, spend a little bit of time just having a look at these diagrams, because hopefully it'd be useful. Okay, we'll move on at this point to have a look at calls. And again, I know David covered this last week, but both he and I think that there's a bit more to be said, and I think some of the participants from last week wanted that as well. So hopefully you'll excuse me if this is repeating some of last week's session, but I think it's useful. The calls in Stedman doubles, as David explained last week, are different to the calls on any other stage. It's just the way it is. There is a reason for that, and David explained that actually the plain course of Stedman doubles is 60 changes. There's only 120 maximum changes, so the easiest way to generate your extent is to just swap 2 bells over, half an extent apart. So you call a single to swap 2 bells over, 60 changes later, call a single again to swap them back again, and it will come round after 120 changes. That's not true, of course, for triples and caters and sinks, and so the calling is different for that. But also David mentioned last week that the calls for triples and higher, if they were applied for Stedman doubles, it would create a somewhat ugly line because it would force a bell to make more than 2 blows in thirds. I won't go into that in any more detail than that, but if anybody wants to talk to me or David about that, then you're welcome. Suffice to say, the calls in Stedman doubles are a law unto themselves. They're on their own, so we just have to learn those separately and just accept that that doesn't lead to an understanding of the calls at the higher stages. So the key things with the calls for Stedman doubles is that you just have singles, there's no bobs, and that's for the reason that I've just explained. You just need to swap 2 bells over and swap them back again, and you get the extent. It affects 2 bells, so the bells in 4-5. And it's called at backstroke at the second row of a 6. Quite often you'll have some fairly experienced conductors will call it at handstroke at the first row of a 6. That's fine as well, but the actual call takes effect the 4th row of a 6. And normally in ringing, we give a whole pull notice. So we don't really need to call it any earlier than the backstroke at the second row of a 6. At all of the stages, triples, caters, sinks, etc., the calls in Stedman are always made at handstroke. They're always called at handstroke and made at handstroke. But in Stedman doubles, it happens at backstroke. And the illustration on the right indicates the 2 pieces of work. The illustration here, just to note, the red line, which is bell number 1, the treble, has just come out of a slow 6. And we can see that because it's made thirds on the way out. The only time you make thirds on the way out is at the end of a slow 6. So in this example, the treble leaves the slow, does this funny piece of work, which is colloquially known as cat's ears, because it looks like cat's ears, and then it goes back in the way it came out. So it does alter the way it would have gone in, because normally slow, quick, slow, quick. This time we go out slow and we go back in slow. But you can also use the example of a quick bell. So the calls don't just happen on your way out slow. They can happen in any 6. It can happen in a slow 6 or in a quick 6. So the example on the left, where we've got the single called, this is actually in a quick 6. And this example here is the same. It's happening in a quick 6, but it could equally happen in a slow 6 as well. And the slightly more complicated one to get your head round are the coat hangers, which is the green line. That's the other bell that's affected. So that would be the bell that would normally be double dodging 4-5 down and going in. Instead of double dodging 4-5 down, it does this piece of work here, which is highlighted in green. And when I was learning Stedman doubles, the easiest way I could ring that was to fit in around the bell doing cat's ears. In my mind, it was a lot easier to ring cat's ears than coat hangers. And so I just thought, what's the bell doing that's doing the cat's ears? And I will ring in the other place. And here we've got a little table that can be used as a reference tool to just show you what you actually have to do at those pieces of work. On the left-hand side, for those of you thinking about maybe calling a touch of Stedman doubles, or people who are a bit worried about the prospect of calling a touch of Stedman doubles, it's actually very easy, especially if you're ringing with a good band, so you don't have to worry about trying to keep people right. It's much easier in some ways calling Stedman doubles than it is Stedman triples, etc. Your call, as I say, happens at the second row of a 6. So here we are on the left-hand side with the green arrows. I've highlighted where the second rows of the sixes are. But actually, the easiest way to call a 120 of Stedman doubles would be to call yourself in quick twice. So if we look at the bottom arrow here, we're ringing the treble. We ring all of our slow work, and at the bottom arrow here, at the backstroke in seconds place before we lead, which is of course the traditional place you would put a bob in plain bob doubles, you know, backstroke before a full lead. Here we could just call a single. The effect would be to swap 4 and 5 over, which prevents it from coming into rounds. The final row would then be 1, 2, 3, 5, 4. We just do the whole thing again. And when we get to that point again the second time, we call the single again, and it swaps bells 4 and 5 back again. So the only 2 bells that need worry about the call are bells 4 and 5. And then we've been useful to the band and called a touch. You know, I can remember when I was learning to ring years ago, there being examples where we just had to ring a couple of plain courses of Stedman doubles because nobody knew how to call a touch, and everybody thought it was this fearsome, complicated thing. But actually, you don't need to worry about knowing where you put the calls in the 6 or anything. You can just call yourself in quick twice, and that's really easy. And you don't have to do that from the treble. You can do that from any bell. So now we'll move on to thinking about the calls in Stedman triples and the higher stages. So again, as David discussed last week, the position that's the calls affect are positions 5, 6, and 7 in triples, and that increases to 7, 8, 9, 9, 10, 11, the more bells that you ring, but we will just focus on triples today. So it affects the bells in 5, 6, and 7. This time it's called at hand stroke, and it's called at the 5th row of a 6, and it takes effect 2 blows later. So the actual effect of it will happen at the first row of a quick 6 or the first row of a slow 6. But either way, it'll always be the first row of a new 6. And in the 3 examples here, it just highlights in grey the area that's affected. So we have our plane here. Then we have our bob with a bell making fifths, which has the effect of keeping the 2 bells that were already at the back in 6/7. They have to stay there. So they've done 2 dodges, they're double dodge. They do 1 for the bob, and then they do another 2. So in total, they're doing 5 dodges. But when you end up doing a lot of dodges like that, it's always best to try and break them up a little bit. So I would always suggest that, that you think of it as 2 dodges, 1 for the bob, and then you start your 2 dodges. Okay, 2, 1, 2. And over here, we've got a single, which, you know, we talked last week about areas of the country that traditionally don't ring very much Stedman, or ringers that say they don't like Stedman. There's certainly areas of the country that when they do ring Stedman, if you call a single in Stedman Triples, everything will collapse. I think people can be quite anxious about singles, more so than the other calls actually. And really, if you spend time thinking about how a single works, it's actually easier than a bob, to my mind. You know, the place that you make fifths, sixths, and sevenths is always backstroke and handstroke. So the first thing you need to think in your head is, my place is going to be backstroke and handstroke. I don't need to panic about when I'm going to do it. It's back and hand. And one of the bells, one of the 3 bells, is unaffected. So the red line here, which is the bell making sevenths, is completely unaffected, like it was over here on the left in a plain lead. So really, all we're doing at a single is swapping the green line and the blue line. The red line is doing what it would normally do at a plain lead. Okay. So on the next few slides, I've just got a few instructions, which hopefully will be useful as a reference tool for those of you who might want to go back and look at the presentation from the website. So for this and the next slide, I'm not going to talk through them in any great detail, other than to just say that where the black arrow appears, that's where the call is called. So that's the 2 blows warning, the whole pull warning. So a bob will be called there at handstroke, and then it will take effect at the following handstroke, which is here at the bottom of that green line. And the same is true, of course, for the single. That's where you would call the single. Okay. Now this table I think is quite useful because it goes back to knowing which way to go in. So the calls in Stedman Triples, how do you know whether they're going to affect you? Are you going to go in quick or slow? Do you have to change the way that you were going to go in or not? There's only 2 parts of the affected work where it does affect the way you go in. And they're the ones that are listed here as flip. So that means you need to flip the way you thought you were going in. Everything else, you go in as normal. So at a single, you'll notice wherever you're affected, whether in 4-5 up, 6-7 up, or 6-7 down, you always go back in the way that you would expect. So let's, for example, say that we'd left the front work quick last time. At a plain course, we would expect to go slow next time. No matter how many singles are called, you still go in slow. If you came out quick, you'll go in slow, and vice versa. The same is also true if you make the bob. So that's when you're double dodging 4-5 up, the bob is called, and you make fifths. Okay, so like with the singles, you go in the way that you would have expected to go in. The only time you need to be consciously think about making a change is if you're dodging 6-7 up or 6-7 down. Every time there's a bob, you need to flip. So if you're at the back and there's one bob, and you had come out quick beforehand, you then go in quick. You don't go in slow, and vice versa. So I think, you know, hopefully that's fairly logical and straightforward. Of course, the problem arises is if you've got some smart aleck conductor who will call bob, 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 single bob, 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 and you've been at the back for heaven knows how many sixes, what hope have you got to try and remember which way to go in? Well, the hope that you've got is to try and use one of those methods that we talked about earlier. And for people just starting out with getting their heads around this, probably the watch and listen and the 4-5 rule might work a little bit better than the coursing rule. And that's simply because the coursing rule works very nicely in a plain course, because you've double dodged 6-7 up, you see who you're dodging with, and you just follow them down to the front. Of course, if you're stuck at the back at a lot of calls, then it's not very easy to spot who your core spell becomes, because your core spell might well change because of the effect of the calls. So that's why I was saying earlier, it's often useful to have more than one method of knowing which way you're going into the front. Of course, the best method is, if you can do it, is to just know, you know, you came out slow, you're going to go in quick next time, and you keep that in your head. But all of us at times need another reminder. So the 4-5 rule and the watch and listen method are really useful.
Mark, sorry to interrupt you. That picks up really well some of the chat that's going on in the group chat that I'll just share with you and to see your comments. Lots of people have commented on this already, so you might have nothing more to add. But Steve's asked, doesn't the core spell rule get a bit complicated if there's a call, which I think you've discussed very appropriately there. So Tony said you have to account for the bell possibly changing until you've left the back. This needs a bit more rope sight to see this change. David likewise said you'll always have a core spell, but it can be changed by a call. Calls may then make it harder to keep track of who you are coursing. It's always the bell that leaves the back immediately before you. And Steph says the core spell method gets easier the more bells you're ringing, because there's more time to spot it as you come down. There's a bobble single or a string of calls.
Yeah, I think probably from all of that, people will probably get in the sense that there's no one right or one promoted, suggested method of doing this. Actually, for most people, a bit of a mixture of all different methods is perhaps useful. But for some people, you know, it's going to take a lot of capacity to just ring the line. You know, just do what you can manage, but know that there are additional rules and additional methods that you can try and adopt as you get more and more competent. So if you find a way that works for you, don't necessarily just think, oh, that'll do, you know, I don't need to apply any more thought to that. There's always more that you can do, always more that you can prepare to try and limit the number of method mistakes that you might make. I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that ringers, by and large, absolutely do not mind people making method mistakes as long as they are trying their best. You know, there's a time and a place for making mistakes, ideally on a practice rather than on a Sunday. But as long as people can see that you're trying and that you're putting the effort in, then that's all that we can ask for, really. It's when people get a bit lazy and they think, oh, I'll just guess which way I'm going to go onto the front. You'll get the sense from what I said earlier that's a particular bugbear of mine. Okay, and we're just going to finish today just with a couple of slides thinking about calling. So a few slides back, I made a suggestion for how you could call a straightforward touch of Stedman doubles, just with a pair of singles. And I'm going to finish now by thinking about how you might call a fairly simple touch of Stedman triples. Now, the diagram on the left-hand part of the screen is the playing course of Stedman Triples with, it's following bell number 7, which is the blue line. And the numbers in green are the calling positions. So this chart, this diagram probably looks quite fearsome to quite a few people. And it does require a little bit of thought, it must be said. But actually, if you break it down and if it's explained to you clearly enough, actually calling an easy touch of Stedman Triples isn't too bad. So traditionally, we have twin bob compositions, which basically means that you call 2 consecutive bobs. Now, the good thing about twin bob compositions are that they're bobs only, so people who might be worried about singles don't need to worry about that. And also, because the bobs always come in pairs, they're 2 consecutive bobs, it means that if you're in 6-7, you flip and then flip back again. So actually, it doesn't alter the way that you would go in. You would still alternate going in quick and slow, regardless of whether there were 2 bobs at the back or 4 bobs at the back, or 2 bobs, 2 planes, 2 bobs. Because the bells come in pairs, the 2 bobs essentially cancel each other out for which way you go onto the front. So if you ever read any sort of theory books about Stedman, you'll often see S, H, L and Q, which is an abbreviated way of saying where these pairs of calls come in. S is when you first go in the slow work. So if you follow my cursor and we follow the bell number 7, S is called here, which is the 5th row of a 6, on your way in slow. So the first one of the pair of bobs is called there, and the second one of the pair of bobs is called there. So again, the 5th row of the 6 and the 5th row of the next 6. And that's called S, that's going in slow. The next pair that we can call is what's called H, which is half, so your first half turn. And that is, again, if you follow my cursor, that's the 5th row of the 6 here and the 5th row of the 6 here. The next one is L, which is your last whole turn. So L stands for last. And the pair of bobs are called here, where my cursor is, and here. And that's the end of your slow work. And the only other pair is the Q, which is quick. And actually the Q is the easiest one to think about. So a quick happens here, where my cursor is, the 5th row of the 6 here. So you're blowing 5th place at the end of your double dodge 4-5 down. You go in quick, and then you call it a hand stroke on your way out after lead. So your first bob of Q is here, and your second bob in the pair is here, hand stroke. Okay. So if we focus on Q being perhaps the most straightforward one to think about, simply because we haven't got to worry about, well, we haven't got to worry too much about knowing that we're putting the call in exactly the right place, because we've only got to remember hand stroke in 5th place, hand stroke in 2nd place. That's all we need to remember with Q. With S, H and L, we've got to ring the slow work, stay right in the slow work, and also make sure we put the call in the right place. So there's perhaps a little bit more thinking that needs to be done if we use S, H or L. But if we're just starting off thinking about calling, let's just focus on Q, quick. And here, this 168 touch, that's a nice length for a practice night. And it's very easy. All we need to do is call Q and then call Q again. So this notation, sometimes you'll see the notation with a dash. More often you'll see it with the figure X across. It means the same thing, and it always means a pair of bobs. So a pair of bobs at position Q, followed by another pair of bobs the next time you get to position Q. So essentially, you as the conductor are ringing two plain courses, because both times you go in quick, you're going to call the calls, but you're not actually affected because you're on the front, you're not in 5th, 6th or 7th place. And here on the diagram on the left, we have the queue here. And as I say, 4, 5, and in 2nd place. Now that's the blue line for the 7th on the left, but it works equally as well from any other bell. So if we're more comfortable calling from a lighter bell, we can ring the treble. And so if we ring the treble, the calling positions are labeled. So this is S, which is the equivalent of that S where the 7th was. L is here for the treble. The only thing we need to be aware of if we're ringing a treble is that the Q is now split between the very end of the course and the start of the course. So if you think about where the treble starts in a plain course of Stedman, of course it started halfway through a quick 6. Yeah, it goes straight out quick to 4, 5. So it actually breaks the twin bob. It breaks the pair of bobs up at the position Q in between the very start of the course and the very end of the course. But that's okay, it's not a problem. We can call our 168 by ringing the treble. We'll just say, go Stedman. Our first blow in 2nd place will be a bob. And that will be the second of the pair of bobs, because the first of the pair of bobs hasn't happened, you know, that had happened before we'd started, sort of thing. So we would call a call there and a call there, and we do it again. So in the middle, so we do a call there, and then we'll do a call there, and then of course we're back to the start again. So our middle pair is actually intact, but at the very start and the very end, it breaks a pair. So it breaks the pair across, but it will still work. And it's a touch of Stedman Triples. It starts with a bob at 1, and quite a lot of ringers like to start with a bob at 1, whatever that means. And there's another touch here, which is a much shorter touch. It's just a 1 course touch. Again, the bell that's the observation bell is unaffected, so it doesn't have to worry about being at the back, but you call SLQ. And you just do that once because it's just 1 course. So a pair of bobs at S, a pair of bobs at L, and a pair of bobs at Q. And the same thing would be the case if you wanted to call from the treble. You obviously now you're starting in the middle of a queue. You're starting in a different place. So you need to start with that bob at 1, then you do your S, then you do your L, and then you do your Q. So actually the diagram here from the 7th and from the treble is actually the calling of the 84 changes, and the calling are where the black crosses are. As I said earlier, you can call this from any bell. The only thing you need to be aware of is that some bells, of course, are already partway through the slow work. So if you think, you know, at the very beginning of a course of Stedman Triples, bells 2 and 3 are already in the slow work. So you need to do a bit of prep if you want to call it from one of those bells, because you need to be clear in your own head where in the position, where in these pairs of calls you're starting. Of course, if you're ringing the treble, I've explained you're partway through a quick 6. So you're partway through the queue. If you ring the 4th, it's quite easy because you're going to just about start by starting with the S. Yeah, you're doing your last dodge in 4/5 before going in slow. So go Stedman, your first blow at handstroke is in 5th place, and that would be the first call here of the S. So if you ring the 4th, you're going to start with the S straight away. If you ring 5, 6 or 7, you've got a bit of time because you're at the back. You've got a bit of time before you need to work out where you're going to make these calls. But bells 1, 2, 3 and 4 all require just a little bit of thought. But certainly bells 1 and 4, I would say, are quite straightforward to call from. And then just to conclude, there's loads of resources online that can help you with understanding Stedman. I mean, if you Google it, there's literally loads. I've put down some of the ones that I think are particularly useful, especially this top one. I don't know whether anyone's come across this, but Bob Wallace has got a web page which includes sort of the opportunity for you to press the arrow keys to actually build up a line of Stedman, to actually practice how to ring a playing course, to practice what a bob and a single does. And it's very interactive. So I would definitely take a look at that website if you've not already. But all the other items, links listed on towards the bottom of the page in the green box, they're also all really useful as well. And you know, different tutors have different ways of explaining things, and some people might find some of the instructions I've given today a little bit not to their liking. They might prefer having a look at how somebody else describes the same issues, and that's only a good thing. So there's the last page of the presentation. As I say, it will go up on the website fairly soon, and do take a look at some of these links. And then I think now, Arthur, we can go to any questions if people have them.
Yeah, thanks ever so much for that, Mark. There's nothing in the chat box at the moment other than what we've discussed. But again, this is a good opportunity. If you do have a question, either raise your hand or unmute yourself. Now's a good time to ask it. Oh, everyone's gone very quiet. In which case, I will end the recording, and then we can, you know, it can be a little bit more informal after that.